everyone, welcome back to Mind Matters. This season, I want to talk about prejudices, not just from a moral or ethical perspective, but really looking at how they operate in our brains. How do these hidden influencers shape our decisions? I explore how we think so we can reshape our world from the inside out, because in the end, every mind matters. Hey everyone, welcome back to Mind Matters. I'm Ivana, and as always, I'm here to make psychology a little less complicated and a bit more relatable. Today, I'm unpacking a quirk of the mind, loss aversion. So let me start with this. Imagine you're strolling down Avenue de la Liberté. The sun's out, you're sipping your coffee, and suddenly, there it is. A crisp 10 euro note lying on the pavement. That's a nice surprise, right? Feels pretty good. But now picture this. Later that same day, you realize you lost a 10 euro note from your wallet. How does that hit you? Most of you will probably say the loss feels way worse than the joy of finding the 10 euros earlier. Even though the amounts are identical, the emotional impact, not even close. That's loss aversion in action. Your brain is wired to react more strongly to losses than to equivalent gains. And this isn't just me saying it. This is classic behavioral science, rooted in some groundbreaking research from the late 1970s. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, two giants in psychology, were the first to systematically describe this phenomenon with what they called prospect theory. Their experiments consistently showed that the psychological pain of losing something is roughly twice as strong as the pleasure of gaining the same thing. Twice. Let that sink in. And by the way, Kahneman later won the Nobel Prize in economics, making him one of the few psychologists to bag that award. That's how influential this concept is. It rewrote the way economists understand how we make decisions. So now, I'm going to unpack this concept from three angles: money, relationships, and FOMO, aka fear of missing out. Along the way, I'll share key studies, experiments, and insights from some of the world's leading psychologists, neuroscientists, behavioral economists, so you can start applying this knowledge immediately. Let's start where most of us feel it first: money. Going back to our money example, the negative impact you feel after losing 10 euros aversion isn't purely emotional, it's biological. Research using fMRI scans, like the work of Brian Knudsen at Stanford, shows that when people anticipate a financial loss, the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, lights up. When anticipating gains, it's the ventral striatum, the brain's reward center, that activates. Losses literally recruit fear circuitry in our brains. Ever wonder why you find it hard to cancel that gym membership you don't use or to unsubscribe from that streaming service you barely watch? That's because giving it up feels like a loss, even if rationally you know you're wasting money. This effect has a cousin called the endowment effect, discovered by Richard Thaler, another Nobel Prize winner. Thaler showed that once we own something, we assign it greater value than we would if we didn't own it. His classic study: participants given a simple coffee mug were unwilling to sell it for less than twice the price that non-owners were willing to pay to buy it. Ownership inflates perceived value. Now, loss aversion has a major role in financial markets too. Studies by Terence O'Dean and others show that investors tend to sell winning stocks too early and hold on to losing stocks too long just to avoid the psychological discomfort of realizing a loss. It also drives irrational behavior in casinos. After losing money, gamblers often double down, not out of greed, but to erase the feeling of loss. This is where neuroscience adds another layer. Knudsen's research shows that anticipatory loss produces stronger fear-based reactions than potential gains do reward responses. So, how do you apply this knowledge? Label it. Next time you're reluctant to make a money decision, whether it's cutting a subscription, ending an investment, or passing up a discount, pause and ask, am I fearing a loss here? Or is this a rational choice? Reframe. Studies by Cass Sunstein show that reframing the situation to emphasize potential gains, like saving time, freeing resources, reduces loss aversion's hold. Pre-commit behavioral economist Dan Ariely suggests setting automatic systems like recurring savings or investment plans to bypass moment-to-moment emotional interference. Now let's take loss aversion somewhere closer to the heart: relationships. Loss aversion doesn't just apply to money, it influences how we navigate love, friendship, and even professional connections. Have you ever stayed in a relationship longer than you should have because the idea of losing that person felt unbearable, even if things were clearly unhealthy? This pattern is rooted in the same psychological circuitry. The fear of loss overrides rational assessments of whether the relationship is beneficial. In a 2012 study from the University of Utah, researchers found that people are more likely to stay in dissatisfying relationships when they feel they've invested a lot of time and energy, even when there's little to no hope for improvement. That's a relational version of the sunk cost fallacy I already talked about, and it is deeply connected to loss aversion. But there's more. John Bowlby's attachments theory also plays a role here. For people with anxious attachment styles, the fear of abandonment, aka the fear of loss, can be heightened. The threat of relational loss triggers the amygdala and insula, both regions associated with emotional pain and fear, as shown in studies by neuroscientist Naomi Eisenberger. And this pain isn't metaphorical either. Eisenberger's research at UCLA showed that social rejection activates the same brain regions as physical pain, primarily the anterior cingulate cortex. In friendships or even at work, you might avoid honest conversations because you fear losing someone's approval or respect, even when that silence costs you in the long run. Ever heard of the phrase, better the devil you know? That's loss aversion. So how can you apply this knowledge to your love life? Detach investments from decisions before making a choice. Ask, am I holding on because it's still working or because I don't want to lose what I've already put in? Use temporal distancing. Ethan Cross at the University of Michigan has shown that creating psychological distance, imagining how you'll feel about this relationship or situation a year from now, can reduce emotional bias and lead to clearer thinking. Normalize recalibration. Relationships and work dynamics shift over time. Being open to reassessing roles, boundaries, or emotional investments can help you move past inertia driven by fear of loss. Let's move to a modern epidemic, FOMO, the fear of missing out. At its core, FOMO is loss aversion playing out in real time, amplified by social media. You see your friends at a party you didn't attend or someone scoring an opportunity you passed on, and your brain flags it as a loss, even if you had no real desire to be there. Research by Andrew Przybylski at the University of Oxford shows that FOMO is linked to lower mood and decreased life satisfaction. The trigger? Perceiving a loss of inclusion, status, or experience. Social media platforms intensify this bias by constantly framing situations as losses. When you see limited time sales, viral events, or everyone's talking about this post, your brain perceives it as missing out on a valuable experience, whether it's true or not. Interestingly, studies using eye tracking by Zoe Chance at Yale found that people spend more time looking at scarcity and loss-framed messages on their phones than they do at positive or neutral ones. In other words, your attention gravitates toward potential losses. Even career-wise, FOMO might push you into saying yes to projects, events, or commitments that don't align with your goals, just to avoid feeling like you're missing something. How can you manage your attention in regard to loss aversion? Audit your input. Pay attention to how often you're exposed to scarcity framing online. Reducing unnecessary alerts and unsubscribing from emotionally charged newsletters can help reduce the stimulus, shift from FOMO to JOMO. The joy of missing out, coined by entrepreneur Anil Dash, is about reframing non-participation as gaining time, clarity, or focus for what matters most. Slow decision-making. Research from Roy Baumeister suggests that when you delay decisions by even a few minutes, you reduce emotional reactivity and are less likely to engage in avoidant or fear-based behaviors. Let's anchor all this in neuroscience. When you become aware of loss aversion, you engage your prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning and regulation, and quiet down hyperactive amygdala responses. In studies like those by Benedetto De Martino at UCL, people who consciously reframed risk scenarios were able to override loss aversion biases, showing increased activation in rational processing centers of the brain. From a practical standpoint, awareness helps shift you from reflexive circuits, what researchers call System 1, to more deliberate analytical System 2 thinking, as proposed by Kahneman himself. How can you apply it at work and school? Loss aversion is rampant in corporate decision-making. Teams stick with unproductive strategies because we've already invested too much. Awareness allows you to frame pivots as gains, like we'll gain efficiency by shifting course, rather than as losses. In leadership, when managing people, frame new policies in terms of gains. For instance, instead of saying we're cutting benefits, frame it as we're streamlining resources to improve X. This aligns with research on framing effects by Tversky and Kahneman, showing that gain-framed messages elicit more positive responses. For students, loss aversion can show up as procrastination or sunk cost fallacy. For example, continuing with a failing study method because you've already spent so much time on it. Instead, try reframing. I'll gain clarity and better results by experimenting with a new method. Loss aversion is everywhere, in your bank account, your friendships, and your scrolling habits. But with awareness, reframing, and systems that bypass emotional reactivity, you can reduce its grip on your life. To put it simply, learn to lose well, and you'll start winning in ways you didn't expect. All right, that's a wrap on today's episode. I will link all the studies and references in the show's description. If you found this discussion insightful, please consider sharing it with friends, family, or colleagues. Let's keep the conversation going about how we can make this affluent corner of Europe a healthier, more equitable place for everyone. Until next time, remember, your mind matters, and taking care of it is the best investment you'll ever make.